Taken in Hiroshima in 1963, this portrait of a young blind girl carries the quiet weight of a city still living in the long shadow of 1945, though her exact connection to that catastrophic day remains uncertain. From a 4,000-year-old skull unearthed in Sweden, archaeologist Oscar Nilsson spent 300 hours rebuilding the face of a Stone Age woman, layering clay over a life-sized replica to return her, with remarkable care, to the world of the living. Emerging from the depths of a Belgian mine in 1900, these coal workers, packed tightly into a single elevator, carry on their faces, and in their closeness, the silent exhaustion of men who have spent their daylight hours underground. In 1928, somewhere across the vast Soviet countryside, a group of peasants gathered around a radio for the very first time, listening to a world that, until that moment, had never reached them. Standing on a road in the shadow of a catastrophic eruption, Richard Lasher had set out simply to ride his dirt bike the day Mount St. Helens exploded before him, and somehow, against all odds, he walked away alive. In Wyoming in 1911, a baseball team composed entirely of death row inmates played 4 games and won them all, with star player Joseph Sengs earning a year's delay to his execution before ultimately being sent to the gallows in 1912. Assigned to Brooklyn in 1969 to combat street crime against women, this married police officer went undercover in disguise. And before long, 2 men confirmed the operation's success by making the kind of mistake that ended in handcuffs. Flourishing from the late 19th into the early 20th century, fat men's clubs required members to weigh over 200 pounds, welcoming wealthy Americans into a world of ceremonial weigh-ins, sporting events, formal balls, and banquets that doubled as social networks. Captured in the Philippines in 1912, this portrait of William Bowler and his wife Dolores holds 2 quietly diverging futures. He would die there in 1930 at 52, while she would live on to 85, eventually passing away in Virginia in 1970. In Kenya in 1962, 9-year-old Kevin from New York and the Maasai chief's son, Diani, forged a remarkable friendship, trading languages, skills, and trust. Kevin learning 11 words of Swahili while teaching Diani how to play baseball and write his own name. On March 17, 1973, at Travis Air Force Base in California, Lieutenant Col. Robert Sturm ran toward his embracing family after more than 5 years as a prisoner of war in North Vietnam, unaware that just 3 days earlier, Loretta had sent him a letter ending their marriage. Convicted the crime of mayhem in 1907, Bertha Baranda was sentenced to 5 years in San Quentin after attacking her husband Frank with a straight razor, though she ultimately served only 2 years before her release. On August 23, 1989, 2 million people stretched hand-in-hand across 690 kilometers through Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania in a peaceful human chain known as the Baltic Way, declaring before the world their common desire to be free from Soviet rule. Pelé, born on the 23rd of October 1940, and widely regarded as the greatest footballer who ever lived, passed away on the 29th of December 2022, leaving behind a legacy that transcended sport and touched every corner of the world. Built high above the ground to deny enemies an entry point, these medieval latrines were nonetheless the undoing of King Richard I's French stronghold, Château Gaillard, when soldiers exploited exactly that vulnerability during a siege in 1203. Stepping out of her bombed home in London in November of 1940, This young bride walked toward her wedding day against the backdrop of the Blitz, as German air raids continued to fall on British cities with relentless and devastating force. Before the eyes of a watching world in Berlin in 1936, American sprinter Jesse Owens stood at the podium to receive his gold medal for the long jump. His achievement, a direct and undeniable refutation of the Nazi ideology that had built the very stadium around him. In the aftermath of the Great Blizzard of 1888, one of the most severe storms in American history, a young man stands in a narrow path, shoveled through the snow on Madison Avenue and 40th Street in New York City, surrounded by drifts that reached as high as 58 inches. In 1962, test pilot George Aird was photographed ejecting sideways from a nosediving English Electric Lightning F1 aircraft, escaping certain death in a split-second while, in the field below, a farmer on his tractor looked on with extraordinary calm. Behind the cheerful facade of the beloved children's television series Teletubbies, which ran from 1997 to 2001, the cast and crew went to considerable lengths to guard their secrets, including blindfolding visitors to the set and building a tent so actors could remove their costumes unseen. In 1987, a National Parks worker carefully cleaned the carved stone ear of the Lincoln Memorial, using a cloth-wrapped pole, tending with quiet diligence to one of the most iconic monuments in American public life. Photographed together in 1864, a young Queen Victoria of Great Britain sits alongside her grandson, the future Kaiser Wilhelm II of Germany, in a portrait that quietly foreshadows two of the most consequential reigns in modern European history. Photographed by Ernst Haas in Vienna in 1946, this returning prisoner of war steps back into a city still bearing the wounds of the Second World War, his homecoming a moment of private relief set against the vast and collective exhaustion of a broken continent. Strolling through New York City in the 1980s, the towering professional wrestler Big John Studd carried a giant boombox through the streets, with the same effortless presence he brought to the ring, an entirely ordinary afternoon for a singularly extraordinary figure. Of the 10 Lysenko brothers who went to the front during the Second World War, every single one of them came home, a fact so extraordinary against the staggering losses of the Soviet Union that it stands as one of history's most quietly astonishing stories of survival. In 1965, Sister Mary Kenneth Keller became the first woman in the United States to earn a doctorate in computer science, a milestone achievement that placed her at the very frontier of a field that would go on to reshape the entire modern world. Deep inside a mine in New Aberdeen, Scotland, in August of 1946, a miner and his pony stand together in the narrow underground passageway, two working lives bound by the same dark and demanding world beneath the earth. Captured in Papua New Guinea during the Second World War, Australian commando Leonard Siflete was photographed in his final moments before being beheaded, and the image, found on the body of a Japanese major in 1944, remains the only known photograph of a Western prisoner being killed by a Japanese soldier. At the 1936 Berlin Olympics, Jesse Owens, the black grandson of enslaved people and son of sharecroppers, won 4 gold medals on the very stage built to showcase Nazi racial ideology, dismantling that propaganda before an audience the entire world was watching. In Sarajevo in 1995, 2 boys sprinted through the notorious Sniper Alley clutching their dog, racing for their lives along an avenue that had already claimed the lives of 225 civilians, among them 60 children. Photographed at a kindergarten in Pimlico, London, in 1980, a young Lady Diana Spencer is seen at work as a teacher, just months before a relationship with Prince Charles would carry her into one of the most scrutinized lives of the 20th century. Captured around 1839 in a daguerreotype, Dorothy Catherine Draper is believed to be among the very first women ever photographed, her poke bonnet, a distinctly pre-Victorian accessory, offering historians a rare and intimate glimpse into the fashion of the 1830s. With calm precision and a hand mirror as her only aid, Annie Oakley demonstrates one of her most remarkable feats, shooting accurately over her shoulder, a performance that made her one of the most celebrated marksmanship artists of the 19th century. Photographed in New York City in 1967 by Joel Brodsky, the Doors are captured at the height of their ascent, a portrait that has since become one of the most enduring and recognizable images of the rock and roll era. Perched on the iron lattice of the Eiffel Tower in 1939, fashion model Lisa Fonsegrives was photographed by Erwin Blumenfeld in an image of breathtaking daring, taken just as Europe stood on the very edge of the Second World War. Taken by Elliot Elizaphan in 1948, this photograph captures the timeless ritual of night fishing in Hawaii, the dark Pacific waters lit only by the soft glow of lanterns, casting their light across an ancient and enduring way of life. Seated at a long telephone switchboard in Kansas City, Kansas, in 1903, these young women performed the invisible labor that kept an entire city connected, their hands and voices the human network behind every call placed and every voice heard. Discovered inside an amphora in northern Italy in 2018, hundreds of Roman gold coins emerged from the earth as a glittering reminder that beneath our modern world lie the buried fortunes and forgotten stories of civilizations that came long before us. Inscribed with the words for Allah in Arabic and found in the grave of a Viking-era woman in what is now Sweden, this extraordinary ring stands as quiet physical evidence of the far-reaching trade and cultural connections of the medieval world. Along the narrow canals of Venice around 1900, a gondolier steers his small vessel past the ancient residential facades of the city, a scene that captured, even then, a way of life that had persisted for centuries almost entirely unchanged. Photographed in 1901, this Russian Orthodox priest, clad in traditional deerskin, presents a striking image at the intersection of spiritual devotion and the harsh natural world of the far north, where faith and survival were woven tightly together. Photographed in 1963, the very first Ronald McDonald appeared on television screens across America, introducing a clown character that would go on to become one of the most recognized brand figures in the entire history of modern advertising. In 1991, Canadian firefighters worked in the scorched Kuwaiti desert to seal oil wells deliberately set ablaze by retreating Iraqi forces, battling infernos that turned the sky black in one of the most devastating acts of environmental destruction in the history of warfare. At only 25 years of age, a young Theodore Roosevelt poses in his cowboy outfit, already shaped by his years working the rugged ranch lands of the Dakotas, a formative chapter that would leave a permanent mark on the man he was becoming. A metal shopping list from the Second World War survives as a small and deeply human artifact, a reminder that even in the midst of global conflict, the ordinary rhythms of daily life, the need to eat, to plan, to provide, never entirely stopped. gaunt and visibly exhausted after enduring the brutal conditions of a Japanese concentration camp. These Australian soldiers were finally liberated in 1945. Their survival, a testament to an endurance tested far beyond what most human beings are ever asked to bear. Photographed in New Orleans in 1863, Isaac and Rosa, two emancipated slave children, were captured in portraits that were distributed as part of an abolitionist campaign, their faces becoming symbols in the wider American struggle over the future of slavery. Seated in Kaesong in July of 1951, a North Korean soldier wrote a period Time magazine featuring two American soldiers on its cover, a small, quiet moment of curiosity set against the devastating backdrop of a war that had already claimed hundreds of thousands of lives. Taken in May of 1923, this final photograph of Vladimir Lenin, seated with his doctor and his sister, captures a man already gravely diminished by illness, just months before his death would set in motion a struggle for Soviet power that would shape the entire 20th century. Taken around 1892 in Mount Pleasant, Utah, this quiet portrait of a barber and his customer captures an ordinary moment of small-town American life, the kind of unhurried everyday exchange that history rarely records, but which formed the texture of an entire era. A woman strolls through London in June of 1967, pushing her baby in a boldly psychedelic pram, a small and joyful emblem of the Cultural Revolution sweeping through the city that summer. Beginning in 1897 and continuing through 1930, the hills of central Seattle were systematically leveled in what may have been the largest deliberate reshaping of urban terrain the world had ever seen up to that point. Published in the Mirror in March of 1919, this comic strip by W.K. Haselden imagined with remarkable prescience the social disruptions that would follow if pocket telephones were ever invented, a question that would take another century to fully answer. Ordered by City Prefect Rambateau to address the notorious odors of 19th century Paris, these phallic public urinals were built across the city to offer its male population a measure of dignity, becoming in time one of the more distinctive fixtures of Parisian street life. Standing amid the spoils of the 2003 Iraq War, a U.S. Army soldier poses with gold bullion, a jarring image of the ancient and the modern brought together in the chaos of conflict. Captured by Voyager 2 in 1981, this image of Saturn's rings offered humanity one of its most breathtaking glimpses of our solar system, a view no human eye could ever witness directly and no earthbound telescope could fully reveal. Patented in 1926, this folding bridge designed by L. Death was conceived as a practical solution to emergencies, compact enough to be transported on a simple handcart and deployable wherever crossing became suddenly necessary. Photographed in the 1970s, Pam Grier blazed a trail through American cinema that Quentin Tarantino would later describe as that of the first female action star, her roles for American International Pictures and New World Pictures redefining what a leading woman on screen could be. On Liberty Day, October 25, 1917, New York authorities staged an extraordinary public spectacle in Central Park, rolling out a captured German U-boat submarine alongside tanks in an unprecedented campaign to persuade Americans to purchase war bonds. Photographed in 1951, this elaborately sculpted hairstyle drew its dramatic inspiration from the atomic age, reflecting the era's complicated fascination with the power and aesthetic of nuclear science. Cut down in 1891 after standing for 13 centuries, This felled tree offered onlookers a silent record of history, written in its rings, each circle marking another year of a lifespan that had begun more than 1,000 years before. 3 generations of women stand together outside their stone cottage in Ireland in 1927. Their quiet presence a portrait of continuity, endurance, and the deep-rootedness of rural Irish life between the wars. Produced in Germany in 1954, the Messerschmitt Kabinenroller was a microcar of striking ingenuity, a capsule-like machine that captured the spirit of post-war European ingenuity and the hunger for affordable, practical mobility. Photographed by John Hurley aboard the Endurance in 1915, the ship's bosun pauses to mend a net during Ernest Shackleton's Imperial Trans-Antarctic expedition, a journey that would fail its stated objective but enter history as one of the greatest feats of human endurance ever recorded. Photographed by John Thomson in 1877, London's street nomads are captured in a portrait that documents, with quiet dignity, a population living on the margins of one of the wealthiest cities on Earth. In California in 1942, a woman carefully assembles part of the engine cowling for a B-25 bomber, one of the countless female workers whose labor quietly powered the American war machine while the world's attention was fixed on the front. In 1963, Polaroid's chief chemist Howard G. Rogers posed with 5,000 bottles of chemical compounds representing years of experimental work, the physical record of the research process that ultimately gave the world color instant photography. Photographed in Central Park in 1933, this Hooverville of makeshift shelters stands as a stark testament to the depth of the Great Depression, its very name a pointed rebuke directed at President Herbert Hoover, widely blamed for the economic catastrophe that had left so many Americans without homes. Photographed in 1900, Mercedes Jelinek was the daughter of automobile entrepreneur Emil Jelinek, and her name, chosen by her father, would go on to grace one of the most celebrated automotive brands in the history of the industry. Documented through a series of photographs, the progressive construction of the Eiffel Tower captures one of the most ambitious engineering undertakings of the 19th century, rising stage by stage above the Parisian skyline between 1887 and 1889. In Washington in 1900, a yarding crew poses beside the donkey engine used to gather felled logs together, a glimpse into the hard machinery-assisted labor that drove the American timber industry at the turn of the century. At Fort Bragg, North Carolina in 1961, a demonstration of rocket belt technology offered onlookers a glimpse of a future that seemed almost impossibly close, the promise of individual human flight hovering just above the ground. Throughout the 1930s, as the United States grappled with the Great Depression, the unchecked danger of American roads claimed thousands of lives annually, prompting President Franklin Roosevelt in 1935 to write directly to state governors urging urgent action to stem the rising toll of traffic deaths. Photographed around 1900 in Brighton, England, J.W. Waldron's combined Smith and Bicycle Works presents a charming image of a small business straddling two eras, the old craft of metalworking meeting the new craze for the bicycle on a single modest shopfront. Photographed in New York City in 1896, a shoestring peddler works the streets as part of the vast informal economy of working people, whose daily labor kept the city alive in ways that rarely appeared in the official records of the age. In a career of extraordinary distinction, Actor John Cazale appeared in just 5 films between 1972 and 1978, and every single one of them received a nomination for the Academy Award for Best Picture, 3 of them winning, before his death in March of 1978. Photographed in 1899, Hattie Tom, a Chiricahua Apache woman, sits for her portrait in a buckskin dress adorned with tin cones, bead necklaces, and earrings, her image a dignified record of a culture and a people facing profound and imposed change. Between takes on the set of the 1954 film Godzilla, the actor inside the monster suit sits unmasked and quietly sips tea, a behind-the-scenes moment that humanizes the creature whose looming form embodied Japan's deepest post-war anxieties about nuclear destruction. In 1968, workers carefully reassembled the 3,200-year-old temples of Abu Simbel at Aswan, Egypt, having hand-sawn the sandstone structures into over 1,000 pieces and relocated them 200 yards inland to protect them from the rising waters of the new Aswan High Dam. Somewhere in the 1950s, an entire family balances together on a single Vespa, a scene that perfectly captures the cheerful, improvisational spirit of post-war Italian life and the scooter that became its most beloved symbol. Photographed at Woodstock in 1969, the fashion on display across the festival grounds tells its own story of a generation using clothing as a declaration of identity, freedom, and a deliberate break from everything that had come before. At the 1988 Slam Dunk Contest, Michael Jordan launched himself from the free throw line and hung in the air long enough that the moment seemed to defy gravity entirely, producing one of the most iconic images in the history of basketball. Photographed by Clifton R. Adams for the National Geographic in the late 1920s, a war veteran sells matches on a Canterbury street corner. His circumstances a quiet and painful commentary on how little the nation had done for the men who had served it. Created by Charles Fichot in 1867, this bird's-eye view of Paris presents the city at a moment of sweeping transformation under Baron Haussmann, the grand boulevards and formal geometry of a reimagined capital rendered in precise and breathtaking detail from above. Around 1900, 2 villagers paused to drink together at Bidford-on-Avon's annual mop fair in Warwickshire, a fleeting social moment that connects them to centuries of English rural tradition, still very much alive at the turn of the century. Photographed in New York City on the evening of November 22, 1963, commuters made their way home, carrying the weight of news that had stopped the world. The ordinary rhythms of city life continuing in the shadow of an extraordinary and shattering loss. Taken in 1840, the first known photograph of Niagara Falls captures one of the natural world's most powerful spectacles in the fragile early technology of the daguerreotype, preserving a view of the falls as they appeared to a world still learning to see through a camera's eye. Documented by photographer Camilo Jose Vergara during the 1970s, the streets of East Harlem bear the visible marks of economic stagnation and urban neglect, his images offering an unflinching record of communities living through a period of profound institutional abandonment. Unearthed in the garden of a Pompeii house, this so-called sorceress kit, a collection of roughly 100 small objects buried in a box, is believed to have been the working toolkit of a fortune teller used for fertility rituals, love rites, and the reading of omens surrounding birth and pregnancy. One of only 11 surviving Tupinamba feather capes from the 16th and 17th centuries, this remarkable Brazilian garment, now housed at the Royal Museums of Fine Arts of Belgium, has endured the centuries in unusually fine condition, while most of its counterparts have suffered serious physical deterioration. In Iowa in 1943, female factory workers paused together on their lunch break. A quiet human moment within the larger story of women's mass entry into industrial labor that the demands of the Second World War had made not just possible, but absolutely necessary.